Hello and welcome to Narayana IS. I'm Pratik, your faculty for Polity, IR and Security. Now students, in the last lecture, we completed all the topics under the theme Judiciary, right? Now in this section, we shall be starting a new theme and the title or name of the new theme is Important Bills, Acts and the Guidelines, right? So here you need to understand that we are going to discuss around 13 topics under this new theme. Make sure you have pen and paper to jot down the running notes, and also make sure you're downloading the notes from the description, the link. Please open the link and download the notes and make sure you're revising each and every topic that we discuss. Right, before we begin, I have an announcement for you, all those students who want to be a part of 1 year and 2 year Prelims come Mains integrated program. I request to please scan the QR code available on your screen, fill in the required details, and our team shall get back to you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and make sure you spread the video to as many needy aspirants as possible so that they can also benefit out of the program that we have launched. Right? So, as I told you, we shall be discussing 13 topics under the theme Important Acts, Bills and Guidelines. For example, the first topic that we shall be discussing is the new criminal laws which replaces the Indian Penal Code, CRPC, Indian Evidence Act. Then second topic is about the Waqf Bill, the Amendment Act of 2024. Third one is the Public Examination Prevention of Unfair Means Bill 2024. Telecommunication rules, the UGC draft regulations, what is sedition, the guidelines for the OTT platforms, the right to information, right to education, and these are the remaining four topics. The 10th one is the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. 11th one is the Places of Worship Act, 12th one is the UAP, and the 13th one is the Post Office Act. So these are the 13 topics that we shall be discussing. Make sure you're fresh, you have pen and paper to jot down the running notes, and make sure that you revise each and every topic that we discuss. It is my responsibility to make sure that you understand every topic, and it is your responsibility to ensure that you revise each and every topic that we discuss for the day. On this note, let's get started with the first topic, and the title being the new criminal laws. Now, India's new criminal laws, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which replaces the Indian Penal Code, the Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita, which replaces the Criminal Procedure Code, and the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam, which replaces the Indian Evidence Act. It came into force on July 1, 2024. Now, these laws have replaced the older criminal laws. These laws were in place, were in force since the British rule. Right? Now, first and foremost, we'll understand why were the new criminal laws needed. It is important to understand the rationale behind the new criminal laws. Now see, the old laws which the IPC, the CRPC, the Indian evidence were made during the uh, British times, isn't it? They were made during the British times, which means they were actually not made for the modern Indian society. And over time, they became outdated and failed to deliver justice and also handle the new types of crimes. So there's a need to replace them so that the new laws they match with today's social realities. Also takes into consideration the technological evolution, and also most importantly consider or incorporate the constitutional values, constitutional provisions mentioned in the Indian Constitution, which means to ensure that the new laws are aligned with the modern realities. That's the reason we replaced the three new laws, or we replaced the old laws with the new laws. The reason number one, outdated colonial legacy. We'll understand one by one the reason why we replace the old laws with the new laws. As I told you, the earlier laws were made by the British, which means the purpose of the laws made by the British was to control the Indians. To control the Indians so that they protect their rule over India. So it actually reflected colonial thinking and did not match with the values of independent India. For example, let me give an example. Section 377 of the IPC, which actually section 370, which criminalized homosexuality, that is, the same-sex relationship, was based on the old British ideas. And then in the year 18, it was struck down by the Supreme Court. Why? Because criminalization of the same-sex marriage, it violated the constitutional provisions of equality under Article 14 and dignity. And there were many other criminal laws had similar issues. That's the reason it needed to be changed or replaced. That's the reason we introduced new laws. So first one is the outdated colonial legacy. The second one is the complex and ambiguous nature. Now see, the old laws, the IPC, CRPC had complicated and sort of unclear language. And this actually made it very difficult for the common people, let's say the common people, the police and the courts to understand the nuances, the interpretation of the terms. It caused confusion and so the delays in many cases. And the courts often had to deal with at times the overlapping provisions. It had to deal with the overlapping provisions. And this actually led to the trials being very slow and delayed justice. For example, we all know about the Nirbhaya gang rape case. It took so many years to reach a final judgment, even though the crime was very serious. Second reason. Third is evolving crime, the nature of the crime which is evolving. Now, if you see in recent years, many new crimes have come up that the old laws did not cover well. For example, cybercrime. So cybercrime is an evolving crime. Then we have, so many online financial frauds. Then we have, data theft, data breaches. They're not properly addressed by the old laws. And if you see, as the technology evolved, the criminals also started using new methods to commit crimes. But the justice system, the laws meant to actually punish people who commit crime, it struggled to keep up. Why? Because the legal framework did not change, which means, see, the law has to change as the society changes. The law should align with the evolving societal changes. And the technology was evolving, the nature of crime was evolving. Unfortunately, the law remained the same. That's the reason the criminals used or they took the advantage of this gap and they committed crimes. That's the reason we had to replace the old laws. Next, misalignment with the constitutional values, which means conflicting with the constitutional values. Now, old laws, they went against the constitutional provisions. For example, let me give an example. Article 19. What Article 19 talks about? It talks about a right to freedom of speech and expression. But then, if I talk about the section 124 of the IPC, which is the sedition. Now, on one hand, Article 19 says that people have the right to speak and express what they feel like. But then section 124 of the IPC, it actually punishes people if the people criticize the government. Even if they are doing it peacefully, many times this law has been misused. And the way this law has been misused, it made it very clear that such laws, they are not in alignment with the democratic values of, let's say, liberty, equality, justice, secularism. That's the reason we had to replace the old laws. Fifth, human rights violations. This is very important. Now, if you see, the criminal justice system has also been accused of what? Of violating the human rights. There have been many cases of custodial torture. What is custodial torture? Where the accused people are beaten up in the lockup. Custodial torture. You must have seen in the movies, right? The way the accused are beaten by the police. Then there have been illegal arrests. Then there have been fake encounters. Then there have been unfair trials. And actually, it led to the violation of human rights. Now, these incidents show that old laws did not give enough protection to citizens. In a democratic country, the system ensures people are protected, but the old laws was not given or was not giving enough protection to the people, and that's the reason we had to replace the old laws. For example, in the year 2020, a father and son were beaten up so badly in Tamil Nadu that they succumbed to injuries and died. And such incidents show that there is urgent need for legal reforms to protect the respect, the dignity and rights of each and every citizens. That's the reason we have to replace the old laws with the new laws. Now talking about the new criminal laws, right? These are the new criminal laws. So if I talk about the first, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Now this law, right? It replaced what? It replaced the Indian Penal Code. Indian Penal Code, which was actually framed in the year 1860. So BNS replaced IPC. This was drafted in the year, it was drafted or brought into force post the recommendation of the first law commission in the year 1830s under the Charter Act of 1833. Under the Charter Act of 1833, based on the recommendations given by the first law commission, the Indian Penal Code or the criminal laws were codified in our country. The second one is the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita. Now, talking of this law, this law actually replaced the Criminal Procedure Code, CRPC. Now, this CRPC was framed in the year 1898. 1898. This CRPC provides procedure for how the criminal laws are to be implemented. How the criminal laws are to be implemented. And the last one is the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam. Now this, it replaced the Indian Evidence Act. Now this Indian Evidence Act was framed in the year 1872. 1872. Uh, Now this actually governed what kind of evidence could be accepted in court. The kind of evidence that is acceptable by the court. This Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam, it states the type of evidence that is accepted by the court. So this is the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam. Now let us try to understand the changes made under each of these new criminal laws. One is the BNS, the second one is the BNSS, third one is the BSA, that is Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam. First one is the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam, which replaced the Indian Evidence Act. First one is the electronic records as primary evidence. Electronic records as primary evidence, which means the digital records, like we have the emails, we have the messages, then we have the the server logs. They are now treated like physical documents and can be used directly in court as primary evidence. The emails, messages, they can be used as evidence. One. The second one is the expansion of secondary evidence. Now, for example, the certified electronic documents and digital admissions are now included as secondary evidence. It makes it easier to prove facts using digital records. The third one is the admissibility of digital forms, which means the digital versions of documents like the scanned copies or let's say the official emails are accepted in the court. The same way as how the printed documents were accepted. So this is about the Indian Evidence Act, which means in short the electronic documents are also accepted as evidence in a court of law. Then next one is the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Now, the first one is new offense of deceitful sexual intercourse, clause 69. Now, this clause 69 punishes sexual acts. Now, this sexual act, if they're obtained or if an act happens through, let's say, fake promises, false promises, or let's say fake identity, or let's say manipulating, then a person is punished up to 10 years in jail. One. The second one is hate crimes recognized separately under clause 103. Now the clause 103, it treats crimes based, let's say, on the color, race, caste or community as separate offenses, so as to ensure there is strict punishment for each of these offenses. The next one is the organized crime and terrorism included under clause 111, which essentially means that clause 111, it includes serious crime. Serious crime, for example, we have kidnapping, we have extortion, then we have trafficking, then we have cyber crime. Now these crimes are included under organized crime. At the same time, terrorism is now part of the law and not mentioned separately. Yes, there is a separate law. For example, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act is a separate law. But now terrorism has also been included as part of the main law and not just in separate law like the UAPA. Repeal of sedition, right? Now sedition, we discussed sedition. The old sedition law is removed and it is replaced with a new offense that targets acts which actually harm India's sovereignty, unity or integrity. The law of sedition has been repealed. Next, community service as punishment. Now the way the punishment was given has also seen a change. For petty offences, for small offences, court can now order community service to serve the community instead of spending time in jail. Now, serving the community also gives you a chance to reform and also uh, reduce the overcrowding of prisons. Next one is the mob lynching criminalized. Mob lynching, when people beat a person, right? So mob lynching is now a specific crime with stricter punishment under the law. Next, zero FIR made compulsory, which means FIR must be registered at any police station even if the crime has happened anywhere. So the victims aren't turned away in any of the police station. Then mercy petition timeline set. Now mercy petitions must be filed within 30 days within 30 days of rejection of review petitions. 30 days of rejection of review petitions and the decision must be made within 60 days. Decision must be made within 60 days. And then we have death penalty appeal requirements tightened. Now this states that appeals in death penalty cases must now be heard by a 3-judge bench to ensure greater fairness. This is with respect to death penalty. So again, you do not have to mug up, you just have to go through the provisions, right? That will suffice and that will be sufficient for you to remember or recall the provisions in the examination. Then the Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita, or you can just remember 4 provisions brought or the 4 provisions, new provisions brought under each of these laws, because a question for mains can also be asked in the examination for prelims as well as mains. Next one is the Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita, which is the Criminal Procedure Code. Right? Now, first one is the extended police custody, which means for serious crimes, courts can now give police custody up to 90 days. The police custody is extended. Initially, it was given only for 15 days, 1-5. Now it is given for 90 days. Then the trials in absence of accused. For example, courts can now continue trial even if the accused person, let's say, he has escaped the justice or trial. For example, people like Nirav Modi, Vijay Mallya, even then they can be tried even when the accused is absent. Then time-bound trial guidelines, which means there is time bound. Now, cases, especially those involving public servants, must be completed within fixed time. Why? So as to speed up the justice delivery mechanism. Then we have the victim-centric legal process. Victim-centric, not the accused-centric, which means victims will now receive regular case updates and also better support during the trial process. Then we have the mandatory forensic investigation, which means, for example, for crimes like rape and offenses punishable by 7 years, the forensic tests are now compulsory. Why? To strengthen the evidence so that the accused, or let's say anyone who has committed a crime, is punished. Then e-FIR and online reporting. Now this is something new, which means the FIRs for non-cognizable offences can now be filed online, making it easier for the citizens to file, or let's say to report crimes. Then summons and warrants in digital mode, which means courts can now issue summons, that is calling someone to appear before the court, and warrants, that is it can be arrest warrant, through email, also SMS. Now this makes the process more sufficient. We are integrating technology. Next, daily hearings and 45-day disposal target, which means after the charges are framed, after the charges are levied, the courts must conduct daily hearings and aim to complete the entire trial within 45 days. These are the changes brought under the Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita. I hope you understood the changes brought under the 3 new criminal laws. Let us proceed then towards the next topic, which is the Waqf Amendment Bill 2024. Now, this was introduced in the Lok Sabha to make changes to the existing Waqf Act of 1995. Now, this has already been passed in both the houses. The purpose is how the Waqf properties are managed and the functioning of Waqf boards are made more efficient and inclusive. So, this is the context. Now, let us try to understand what exactly is a Waqf. Now see, Waqf is defined as a permanent dedication of movable or immovable property for religious, charitable or pious purpose according to the Muslim law. It's a Muslim law wherein a property, be it movable or immovable property, is permanently dedicated for religious or charitable purpose. Now see, the Waqf properties are often used to support, let's say, mosques, the schools for Muslims, the graveyards, or let's say also to provide help to the needy people. Please remember, once a property is declared Waqf, it cannot be sold or transferred. Once a Waqf, always a Waqf. And its the income from the Waqf should be used for the purpose it was intended for. I hope you understood what are the Waqf properties. Now, please remember, each state must form a Waqf board. Each state Each state must form work board to manage and oversee the properties within that specific or within that state. So every state has a works board. At the central level, we have the Central Works Council. We have the Central Work Council. Now, this is a statutory body, which means it was framed by passing a law in the parliament. This was framed under the Works Act of 1954, right? And this Central Works Council falls under the Ministry of Minority Affairs. So again, these points are very, very important for your prelims examination. Now, when it comes to recommendations of the Central Works Council. Now, what are the responsibilities? Not recommendations, the responsibilities. Now, what are the responsibilities? One, it advises both the central as well as the state governments on how the work boards within every state should function and how the works properties are to be managed. One, advises both the central and the state government. Next, it also issues guidelines. Guidelines to whom? The Central Work Council, it issues guidelines to the state governments and the work board within each and every state. How? The purpose is how to improve transparency and enhance the performance of the work board so as to ensure that people are benefiting, or people of the religion or people in general are benefiting. Then the Central Works Council, it also helps in running the development program. It also helps in running the development program for the work properties and supports education schemes. Now, please remember another point for your examination, that is the union minister who is responsible for the works is the ex officio chairperson. The union minister, he is the ex officio. Whoever is the minister, he is also the chairman of the Central Works Council. Central Works Council. I hope you understood this particular point. So I hope you understood the responsibilities of the Central Works Council. Now let us try to understand the provisions, the changes made as per the Works Amendment Bill 2024. First and foremost was with respect to renaming the Act. Now the existing Work Act of 1995 will be now known as the United Work Management Empowerment Efficiency and Development Act of 1995. First is with respect to changing the name, because again see uh, questions with respect to acts are also asked in the examination. They may give a statement, the name of the act and the provisions. So which of the following provisions are part of the act passed in the year 2024? Such questions can be asked. Second is with respect to formation, how the workforce is to be formed. Now, the bill states that only a Muslim individual who has been practicing Islam for at least 5 years can declare waqf. A practicing Muslim can declare a waqf who has been practicing for 5 years. The person must also own the property being donated. Second, formation of work. Third is with respect to government property, which means that if any government land is mistakenly marked as work, it will be returned to the government ownership. So if there's, let's say, a dispute, which means here the government seems to be winning the case. And if there is a confusion, if there's a serious dispute, then the district collector will decide who the land belongs to. Again, which means it's more favorable to the government. Next, survey of works. Now, initially, the survey commissioners were surveying the works. The survey commissioners. Now, the job of surveying the work land will now be done by the district collectors according to revenue laws of each and every state. Now, who does it? First, the survey commissioner used to do it. Now, the district collector, which means you see again the responsibility of district collector is overburdened. Maybe tomorrow, once you clear the examination, you'll have to actually look after the dispute and decide whether this particular dispute belongs to the work or the government. Then the Central Work Council. We discussed what is Central Work Council. It is a statutory body. Now this amended law of 2024, it introduces greater diversity in the Central Work Council. It now requires at least two non-Muslim members, two non-Muslim members, and then we have the members of parliament, then we have the retired judges, then we have the respected public figures who are also made part of the Central Work Council, which means members belonging to other religions are also given a chance or representation in the Central Work Council. However, there must also be proper Muslim representation, which means including the Muslim scholars, leaders of the Muslim organization, and also the chairperson of the work board. And at the same time, the act says that there has to be at least two Muslim women among the members, which means it provides for gender representation as well. Next, about the work board. Work board, we discussed that every state would have a work board to manage the property. Now, state governments are now allowed to nominate non-Muslim members again at the central work as well as at the work board. Non-Muslim members are also given representation. Then the boards of every state must also include people from the Shia sect, the Sunni sect, and other Muslim communities as well. And again, every board needs to have two Muslim members as well, again providing for gender representation. Then the tribunals, which means the tribunals, now what are the tribunals? They actually handle the work related disputes. Now these tribunals will now be headed by the district court judge. The tribunals will be looked after by the district court judge and will also include an official of the joint secretary rank. Initially, a Muslim member, expert in Muslim law, was actually part of the tribunal, but now an expert in Muslim law is not part of the tribunal. Next is appeal. Appeal, which means earlier the decisions made by the work tribunals were considered final and binding. Now the new law also allows the decision of the tribunal be challenged before the High Court. And then next with the central government powers, which essentially means that now the central government is now given more powers. Why? So as to ensure that the rules for how the work properties are registered, or let's say of how the accounts are to be published and how the audits are to be carried out. For example, audit will be carried out by the comptroller and auditor general, or let's say a government appointed officer. So here you see the central government is being given more power. Then the law also allows for a separate workforce, which means a workforce can now be created for the Aga Khani and the Bohra sects along with Shia and Sunni, which means it also provides for greater representation of different Muslim communities. So these are the important provisions of the Work Amendment Bill 2024. I request you to please remember. Okay, you don't have to mug up. You please go through all these provisions. Reading it twice or thrice will help you to recall these provisions in the examination hall. The next, the Public Examinations Prevention of Unfair Means Bill 2024. Now, the context says that the Parliament of India has passed the Public Examination Prevention of Unfair Means Bill 2024. The main aim is to stop cheating and unfair practices in the public recruitment exams that are conducted across the country. These exams include those held by bodies such as UPSC, SSC, Railway Recruitment, NTA, IBPS, and various central government departments and offices, which means we come across so many cheatings in examinations. In order to stop the cheating, in order to ensure that the examinations are carried out with utmost sincerity, transparency, this law was passed in our country. Why? So that all the unfair practices should be prevented in our country to ensure the sanctity of the examinations. Now, which are the offenses related to public examination? One, the definition of unfair means. Now, the bill clearly defines what is considered unfair in public examination. Now, what is considered unfair? For example, this includes assessing question papers or exam materials without permission. Second is helping candidates cheat, tampering with computer systems or let's say official documents, or let's say printing or spreading the exam materials for profit, which means the definition of unfair means is clearly defined in the law. Next is with respect to leaking and disruption. Leaking and disruption, which means it is also crime to leak confidential information or enter exam centers without permission to, let's say, to cause disruption in the examination hall. Next, we have the punishment. Punishment, again, there's punishment, it's a punishable offense. So, what kind of punishment? Jail, this is not required, right? So, jail term can also be avoided. Jail term or fine can also be avoided. So, please remember this. How many years jail is not important to remember. Then responsibilities of service providers, that is who conducts the examination. Who conducts the examination? Now, what is the responsibility? One is mandatory reporting, which means organizations or agencies that conduct public examinations must report any rule violations or suspicious activities. This is mandatory. And if the service providers fail to report, then there is penalty, again jail term or let's say a fine. So, how many years jail? Again, is not important for the examination, right? Now, organized crimes. Now, this is important. This provision can be asked in the examination. Now, the bill says, the act says that if a group or company helps in cheating or let's say earn profits through illegal examination related acts, for example, tampering, right? It is considered organized crime. Definition. And the punishment, of course, the punishment will be more. The punishment includes 5 or 10 years of imprisonment and a minimum fine of 1 crore rupees, right? Which means it is punishable offense. Then the institutional involvement. If the institution is involved, the property can be seized and the institution must repay the full cost of the examination. Inquiry and investigation nature of offences, which means that all offences under the bill are cognizable offences, which means the police can, one, it is cognizable, which means the police can arrest without warrant. It is non-bailable. Bail is not given and non-compoundable. Non-compoundable, which means it cannot be compromised outside the court. This is the nature of offences as per the law. Exceptions. Now, which are the exceptions? Now, those who can prove that they acted with due care may get some relief. Investigating authority. Now, the investigation must be conducted by senior officer or at least the deputy superintendent police or the assistant commissioner rank, which means the inspectors cannot carry on the investigation, cannot uh, undertake the investigation. Transfer of cases. Now it is the central government who has the power, and the central government can transfer the cases to the central agencies like the Central Bureau of Investigation whenever the central government deems it fit. Right? So let us, so this brings to the end of the third topic. Let us proceed towards the fourth topic. The Telecommunication Rules Bill 2024. The Union Government has notified the telecommunication procedures and safeguards for lawful interpretation of messages. What is interpretation? That is, let's say two people are talking. Now, this communication can be intercepted. These rules define how the government agencies can lawfully interpret. The interpretation has to be carried out lawfully, right? Now, these rules 2024, they replace 419A rule of the Indian Telegraph Rules of 1951, right? So we'll understand each and everything. First and foremost, let us try to understand what is lawful interception. What is lawful interception? Lawful interception means the official and authorized monitoring of private communications like the phone calls, text messages, or internet data. Two people are talking, sending messages, communicating using internet. This communication can be intercepted by whom? By the law enforcement agencies, by the authorized agencies. Now, this interpretation, this interception is done by the law enforcement, or let's say the security agencies. When there is a reason, there's a legal reason. For example, let's say if there's a threat to the national security of a country, if there's a threat to public safety, or let's say if the law enforcement agency is planning to prevent serious crime, then during such case, the law enforcement agencies or security agencies can intercept the communication. But here it is important to note that the process followed by the law enforcement officials must follow clear procedures, and legal safeguards should be provided to protect the individual rights. Legal safeguards should ensure that the individual rights are protected, which means a due process needs to be followed. Due process needs to be followed. Now let's discuss about the Indian Telegraph Rules of 1951 and the Rule 419. Now please remember that the Indian Telegraph Rules of 1951, this 1951 rules were made under the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. See, as I told you, to enforce the provisions of an act, rules are to be framed. So, in order to enforce the 1885 Act, the rules were framed after independence, that is in the 1951. And what is the purpose? The purpose is to regulate the purpose of this act is to, or the purpose of these rules being to regulate the telecom services and also interception, to regulate the telecom services and interception in our country. So please remember these rules, and the 2024 rules are replacing these rules, and remember the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. Now, in the year 2007, Rule 419 was introduced. It allowed interception when there were concerns related to national security or public safety. Only the Union Home Secretary or the State Home Secretary could authorize such actions. In 7, when Rule 419 was added, only the Union Home Secretary can authorize the interception of communication. This actually highlights the fact that the individual rights were protected. Why? Because it required the authorization of the Union Home Secretary or State Home Secretary to, let's say, to intercept a communication. This is very, very important. Now, it is important to understand why the new rules were introduced. Why the new rules were introduced. And also, please remember that, yeah, this rule 419E, it also required a written order. And the decision has to be reviewed by a high level review committee. These procedures, these safeguards were introduced following the Supreme Court judgment. Here the court stressed the importance of protecting the privacy rights under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Given the Supreme Court's interpretation of Article 21, due safeguards were ensured to protect the individual rights, which means it was not easy for the authorities to intercept the communication. It requires a written order from the Union Home Secretary. This how the provisions, the safeguards were stringent so as to protect the individual rights. The question is why the new rules were introduced in the year 2024. Now, please remember that over time the communication has changed drastically. We know that. We have the, we see the rise of mobile networks, then internet calls, then the encrypted, in the WhatsApp, we see the messages being encrypted. And that's the reason, if you see the old rule which was brought in the year 2007, the 419A rule was actually suited to the older systems like the landline phones. It lacked clarity and scope to cover new technologies. That's the reason the new rules were, or it was important to bring the new rules. And that's the reason the government replaced it with the telecommunication rules of 2024. The purpose? The purpose being to bring the law in line with the modern communication and digital threats. Now, these rules, they also aim to ensure great accountability while ensuring the citizens' rights are protected more efficiently. So, again, the new rules were brought. Why? Because the communication system has undergone drastic changes. Now, here if you see the comparison between the old rule which was framed in the year 2007 and this one being 2024. Now, here you see only the Union Home Secretary or State Home Secretary could authorize. Here it adds joint secretaries and senior officers of authorized agencies for specific circumstances. For example, if there's an emergency, then here the senior officers can also authorize interception. Grounds for interception only in emergency cases, expanded to include interpretation for operational reasons or in remote areas. So here you can please compare the differences of the rules under the old rules and the new rules. Minimal review mechanism outline here introduces a central review committee comprising cabinet secretary, home secretary and law secretary. No mandatory provision for destroying interception records. Here it mandates destruction of interception records every 6 months. So these are the differences. So I request you to please open the notes, and there are few more differences. I request you to please download the notes and go through the differences. Just you have to go through it once, twice, more than sufficient for you to remember. Let us proceed towards the next topic. The next topic talks about the UGC draft regulations of the year 2024. Now, the University Grants Commission that regulates the higher education has released the draft UGC minimum standards of instruction for the grant of undergraduate and postgraduate degrees regulations 2024. Now, these draft regulations are meant to bring major reforms in the higher education. Again, you don't have to remember the entire name. Purpose is to bring major reforms in the higher education as suggested in the National Education Policy of 2020. Now, let us try to understand the purpose of the new regulation. Now, the new draft that was brought in by the government, it aims to make the higher education more flexible, more inclusive, and most importantly, more student friendly. Because we often hear that the education system is not student friendly, which means it includes student friendly, which means it includes multiple ways of learning. For example, it also supports interdisciplinary education, and it ensures or it tries to bring the Indian education system academics with that of the international standard. How? Let us discuss few features of the draft brought in by the government, then you'll understand the importance of the new draft rules. One, biannual admissions happening twice a year. Now, the higher education institutions that are well prepared can now admit students twice a year, once during July, August, and the one during the month of Jan and February. Next is multiple entry and exit options. Now, the draft allows students to, let's say, pause and also rejoin their studies at different stages. For example, because of financial burden, a student may skip the education, skip, let's say, the college class, and then rejoin once he is stable. So their academic progress will be assessed through continuous formative assessments. It also recognizes prior learning and permits students to pursue two undergraduate or postgraduate at the same time. So here the keywords are prior learning and at the same time two undergraduate as well as two postgraduate subjects at the same time. Then discipline flexibility, which means students can now apply for any undergraduate or postgraduate course, even if their earlier studies were in, let's say, different subject. Let's say a person who had, let's say, science can also opt for arts. However, they must qualify through the required national and university level entrance examinations. So qualification through the national level examination or let's say the state level examination is important. Attendance autonomy. Now here this is important. Now the colleges and universities can now set their own attendance requirement, and this depends on the nature of the program. This actually helps the institutions support various learning formats, such as, let's say, the multidisciplinary models. Now, this multidisciplinary, which means the student can, as I told you, opt for two different subjects, and this actually has been mandated by the National Education Policy of the year 2020. And then the last one is the credit distribution for the undergraduate degrees, which means to earn a degree, let's say with a major in a particular subject, students must earn at least 50% of their total credits in that subject. The rest of the credits can be gained through, let's say, the skill based courses, or let's say the apprenticeship, or even the multidisciplinary subjects. So 50% credit has to be obtained in the subject, rest can be obtained through multiple means. So these are the changes brought as per the new UGC draft regulations of the year 2024. Here you see again the difference between accelerated degree program and the extended degree program. Here, for example, students can complete a 3-year or 4-year undergraduate degree in short time by taking an increased credit load each semester by appearing more papers every semester, can complete 3-year or 4-year degree in less time. So this students can extend their degree timelines by up to 2 semesters. So this again I request to please remember the difference. This can be important for your examination, right? Hmm. Now, the next topic, the content is the Supreme Court is currently hearing petitions that challenge the constitutional validity of the sedition law under the Indian Penal Code. We know that the sedition law has been, has been repealed, but the new law that was brought in as part of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which replaced the Indian Penal Code, is applied prospectively, which means from future date, from future. What about the cases that were framed under the old sedition law. That's the reason the Supreme Court is actually looking into the constitutional validity of the sedition law. Let us try to understand first and foremost what exactly is sedition. Now see, sedition refers to the use of words or let's say actions that aim to create hatred, disloyalty or let's say contempt against the government of India or state as well. And in India, the sedition is covered under was covered under section 124 of the Indian Penal Code, section 124 of the Indian Penal Code, and is a punishable offence. Talking about the historical background, of course, this law was brought in the year 1870 during the British rule. Why? The purpose was to, let's say, oppose the people who are criticizing the government, to suppress any opposition to the government, to the British government. Now, prominent freedom fighters like the Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Mahatma Gandhi, these people were charged under the sedition law many times. And the Constituent Assembly post India became an independent country, the Constituent Assembly also debated upon this particular subject. Right? So, yes, it has been in use since the colonial times, right? So again, there was a fear, there was a concern that yes, this law may be misused, but given the challenges of a country, it was important for the government to retain this particular law. As I told you that there was a concern that the law could be misused, and this is exactly what happened. For example, see how the law was misused. The National Crime Record Bureau data between 2014 and 19, India recorded 326 sedition cases, but only 6 led to convictions. This shows a very low conviction rate, suggesting the law may be applied arbitrarily. One. Second is with respect to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights View. Now, India's use of the sedition law has actually been criticized for being inconsistent with the international obligations, which is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which criticized the use of sedition. Then, the punishment under the sedition law, sedition is a non-bailable offense, which means once the charges are framed under the sedition law, it is difficult to get a bail. The punishment can range from imprisonment up to 3 years to life imprisonment, and there can also be a fine. Again, those charged with sedition, they are barred from the government jobs. They have to surrender their passport and are required to appear in court when ordered. This is what a person has to go through whenever a sedition case or sedition law or the provisions are charged upon a person. Now, let us try to understand the judicial interpretation. Now, this is something very important. The judicial interpretation on sedition. In the Ramesh Thapar vs. State of Madras case of 1950, the Supreme Court ruled that ban on a journal violated the right to free speech. Why? Because a journal was banned, and then the Supreme Court stressed that ban on journal violated the right to free speech under Article 19 of the Constitution. It also stated that sedition was not a valid restriction on free expression. And then in the Kedarnath Singh versus State of Bihar 1962, the Supreme Court, here in this case, the constitutional validity was challenged, but the Supreme Court upheld Section 124A but limited its use to situations where speech leads to violence or let's say public disturbance. It clarified that strong criticism of the government is not sedition unless there is violence associated with the criticism. Then in the Balwant Singh versus State of Punjab 1995, the court acquitted people for raising slogans Khalistan Zindabad. The court said that mere slogans without actual violence or incitement does not amount to sedition. So this is the Supreme Court observation. Now talking on the recent development in 2023, the government proposed to repeal section 124 to the BNS Bill 2023. Now we know that the word sedition was removed in the new BNS law, and a new section 150 was introduced to punish acts that actually harm India's sovereignty, unity, as well as integrity. But because the new law does not apply to the past cases, this is what I mentioned in the starting. The Supreme Court has referred the issue of sedition to the constitutional, or it has referred the issue of sedition to the constitution bench for a detailed review. Right? So this is the topic on sedition. Now, the next topic, guidelines for OTT platforms. Now, the Information and Broadcasting Ministry has issued an advisory to OTT platforms, right? Warning them against showcasing content that glorifies drug use. We see so many, web series where the use of drug is actually glorified. The ministry highlighted that such portrayals could negatively influence the youth and refer to the NDPS Act and IT Rules 2021 as a legal basis for this warning. What is NDPS? The Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act, and then the Information Technology Rules of the year 2021. Now, first and foremost, let us try to understand what are OTT platforms. What one understands by the term OTT platforms. Now, please remember, OTT, which means over the top. Now, this OTT platforms like Amazon, Hotstar are services that deliver the video content directly over the internet and not through, let's say, the traditional cable or like the satellite TV. Which means people like us, users, can stream movies, series and shows anytime on their devices, right? This is, and we know that Netflix, Hotstar, Geo Cinema, these are the popular OTT platforms that people in our country use. Talking about the ITT rules 2021 and the regulation of the OTT platforms. Now, please remember the IT rules 2021. These rules were issued by the MeitY, M Ministry of Information Technology. These rules were framed or were issued by the MeitY, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Which means this rules of 2021, it brings the OTT platforms under a clear regulatory structure. There is a regulatory structure which the OTTs are subject to. The OTTs are subject to clear OTT rules. Now, please remember, this point is very important for examination. Yeah. Now, who has notified the rules? The Ministry of Information and Technology has notified, has issued the rules. But it is the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Ministry It is the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting that is responsible for enforcing them. Again, a question can be asked, who has issued the rules and who has enforced them? So, MeitY has issued them, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has enforced them. So, this is very important to remember. Now, let us also understand the key features of the IT rules of the year 2021. Now, first is the three-tier regulatory system. Three-tier. One is level 1. Level 1, 2 and 3. Now, at the level 1, there is self-regulation by the OTT platform. If each OTT platform like Netflix, Hotstar, they have to self-regulate. They have to follow a code of ethics and they have to handle the complaints internally. This is the level 1. Talking at the level 2, now there is external self-regulatory body. There is external self-regulatory body registered with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. They look into the complaints that remain unsolved or unresolved at level 1. And then comes the oversight of the government at level 3. The government steps in at level 3. There is oversight of the government through an interdepartmental committee. Again, this one is set up by the ministry to handle cases or which are very serious cases or serious complaints. The government comes when there is serious complaint made against, let's say, the OTT platforms. Then talking about the grievance redressal, complaints solving. Now, OTT platforms, it is mandatory for the OTT platforms to appoint a grievance officer. Who? Grievance officer. Every OTT platform has to appoint a grievance officer based in India. If a user files a complaint, it must be resolved within 15 days. Then comes the content classification. Now, content classification, it is to help the users choose appropriate content. The OTT platforms, it is mandatory for the OTT platforms to self-classify the shows, the content by age suitability. By the age suitability. Now, which are the categories? We have the under, one is 13, 13 plus, 16 plus, and then adult. 13, which means it is suitable for viewers age 13 and above with the here parental guidance is required. Then 16 plus, which means suitable for viewers age 16 plus, again with the parental guidance, and then adult, which means again it is suitable only for the adults. Now these guidelines, they aim to create a balance between creative freedom. Now, art, which means creative freedom, and then social responsibility, which means that the content that the OTT platforms are displaying on their platform should be responsible enough. The creative makers, or the, let's say, the artists, the creators, they have to ensure that while they are showing creativity in their art, they also need to be responsible towards the society. That's the reason there is important, or it's important to have a balance between creative freedom and let's say responsibility towards the society. Why? Because it is very important to protect vulnerable viewers like the children and young adults who get very easily influenced by the contents shown on the OTT platforms. All right. So I guess, students, we have discussed 6 to 7 topics today, right? I again request you please go through these topics and ensure that you are revising each and every topic. The remaining, I think, 6 topics we can discuss it tomorrow. Make sure you revise all the 6 topics. Any question, any doubt, I request you to please ask in the comment section. And make sure, students, please spread the word. Spread the word. Tell your students to join the class, because this is an opportunity that you're not going to get. So make sure that you get the students who are in need of, high quality current affairs lectures. Make sure you get them on board. Make sure you spread the word, and make sure you spread it, share it to as many people as possible. And most importantly, make sure you're revising the content that we are discussing in the lecture. On this note, I'll call it a wrap. Thank you so much for watching. Let's continue tomorrow.